Doctors, what is the worst homemade cure a patient used for their illness? Story 1. Not a doctor, but I work at a grocery store deli. One lady, who is a regular, is convinced that magnets cure body ailments. She has magnets in her car, and occasionally she'll make a big show of being unable to breathe. She's fine. And don't call the ambulance. She will walk all the way outside to her car, bring the chintzy fridge magnets back inside to our back corner, then, by rubbing the magnets on her chest through all the layers of clothes, she's cured and doesn't need the paramedics or medical help. And don't get her started on how oranges and vitamins are the cure for autism. Really, don't. I will slap your hand so hard. I work in IT and have a related story. One of our employees was always having odd laptop problems. For years, it seemed. We all jokingly said she was cursed because she went through laptops pretty quickly. One day we were eating lunch in the break room, and she says something about the magnet bed she sleeps on. I said, "Hold up, do what?" She apparently had some long mattress-like thing on top of her regular mattress that was essentially one giant magnet. I asked her if she regularly used her laptops in bed at night, to which she said yes. That suddenly explained most of her IT issues. She stopped using her laptop in bed, and she never really had any more computer issues after that. The worst part of all that was that she's the director of nursing at a healthcare company. That last sentence makes me weep. Story 2. Not a doctor, but the son of one. There was a guy who would go in once a year or so for checkups. He had surgery on his foot and needed it looked at regularly. My dad was a surgeon, so anyways, one day a guy comes in for his appointment, says he isn't feeling well. I think he might have gotten the flu from his kids. No big deal. Unrelated illness happens, right? Well, he was talking to my dad before he took his shoes off. He was beaming. "Yeah, I fell pretty hard, gashed my foot open, but I fixed it myself, saved a trip to the hospital." Well, lo and behold, he has taken copper wire and sutured the gash shut. It had been a week, and it was badly infected. That's where his flu-like symptoms came from. Had he waited a few more days, it would have killed him. Dad took those out, dressed them, the skin had degraded too far to sew up properly, prescribed him antibiotics, and referred him to the hospital for observation. He ended up spending $3,000 on his care instead of the $200 or so for stitches in the first place. Jesus, copper wire, what the frick, why? Use superglue or duct tape like a real American. Story 3. Not a doctor, but I'm an x-ray tech in a hospital, had a patient with a breast infection. She attempted to treat it with Neosporin. When she finally came to the ER, there was just a huge gaping hole on her chest where the breast used to be. The smell in the room was overpowering, to say the least. It turns out you can't cure breast cancer with Neosporin. I don't know if she survived or not. I have metastatic breast cancer. I should save this comment for those days when I'm so sick from my meds that I feel like giving up. Yeah, fatigue and upset stomach and taste changes suck. I'm eating dry toast because that's what my gut can handle. But I will never have a gaping hole in my chest, and I will have good days on these meds. I'll have a few more years than that poor lady. At least I think I will. Worth it. Chemo sucks. Beats the alternative, though. Hope you get better soon. Story 4. Not a doctor, but a pharmacist who works in an ER. I had a woman come in for chest pain, and when I was interviewing her for her medication history, she was telling me how bad the pain was that she took everything in her medicine cabinet. I asked her to list what she has in her medicine cabinet and what she took. The list went Tylenol, acetaminophen, 2 tablets, Advil, ibuprofen, 2 tablets, aspirin, 2 tablets, heroin, 1 to 2 points, Gravol, at which point I kind of had to go, hold up, you used how many points of what? And the patient very matter-of-factly stated that she came in because the heroin didn't help with the pain at all, which in some ways I guess was a pretty reasonable course of action since she came in since the heroin didn't work. Honestly, plus to her for not going super overboard on anything in there if it was the amount you say. Only thing kinda sketchy about that in terms of bodily harm, assuming the heroin isn't adulterated with fentanyl or something else more harmful than heroin itself, is the Tylenol and Advil and aspirin stack. Did you ever find out what was wrong with them? In before, it was just hyperalgesia from chronic opioid usage. Story 5. Nurse here. I used to work in a rural magnet hospital in the South. Had a patient who was there because he'd gotten athlete's foot and decided to use an old mountain remedy. Soak your feet in vinegar, lemon juice, and boiling water to kill the fungus. In fairness, the original remedy probably called for merely hot water, but the guy went a little overboard with the temperature. He gave himself some nice bilateral third-degree burns on his feet, but there was no sign of any athlete's foot, so he had that going for him, which was nice. I'm also a nurse that's done quite a bit of work in the South. Had a woman come in who had what was likely an infected follicle right next to her labia. She thought it would be a good idea to heat up a needle with a pocket lighter to sterilize it, and poked it. I saw her after her first treatment, caused a big old tunneling infection around 1 centimeter in diameter parallel to her vaginal canal. Stuck a big Q-tip in, probably 8 inches, before I hit the end when I was repacking it. I didn't like a single thing I just read. Story 6. An older woman with a big gaping foot ulcer visited her family in Indonesia. Her sister took her to a spiritual healer who instructed her to make an ointment and apply it to the ulcer. The ointment included herbs, sheep urine, olives, and human hair. The day after applying the ointment, she was to cleanse the ulcer in the ocean. After a few weeks of this, the ulcer would heal. Obviously, it did not heal, and a rare mycoplasma bacteria found only in the ocean grew in her wound, and she lost her foot. There comes a point in spiritual healing where even uneducated people can tell it won't work. Spiritual healing, in my opinion, is a bit of a placebo thing, and can be comforting, but this, she didn't stand a chance. Story 7. I'm a paramedic, and my partner told me the worst he has ever seen was for a burn patient. He said that he saw a teenager hobbling towards him covered in a bunch of white gooey gunk. So apparently the homeboy was out in the country trying to start a big bonfire, and he first decided to douse his big bundle with some gasoline before tossing a match in. Well, it caught real fast, and he got a big ol' flash burn across his whole body. His mom apparently used to be a certified nurse and covered him in mayonnaise because that would help treat the burn. Yeah, nah. All she did was introduce a frick ton of infection into his body and make it much more excruciating for him when my partner had to wipe it off of him and place burn bandages on him while they transported him to the hospital. Certified dimwit, more like. Is mayonnaise an instrument? This is like that ad that you see in pop-ups where the cure to everything is baking soda. I don't even know what's in baking soda, but apparently it has divine power to react to any ailment that you have. And yet, for some reason, the doctors aren't using it. Story 8. Not a doctor yet, but I work in EMS. The number of folks who think WD-40 will help arthritis pain is abnormally high. Also, though this is not explicitly a home remedy, the people who think things will just cure themselves with time. Yes, this works sometimes. Yes, healthcare is financially prohibitive, but if something has been debilitating you for more than 72 hours, it probably won't be going away anytime soon. Just go get it checked. It's cheaper to treat something over time than to go, oh crap, I suddenly need $500,000 for this procedure or I'm gonna die. Do they spray the WD-40 on their joints? Please tell me they don't eat it. Spraying directly onto the skin is the most common. Some people have ingested it, though. Story 9. My aunt has this concoction of basically just rubbing alcohol and marijuana leaves, seeds, and stems, and for whatever reason, still thinks that if you rub it over an ache, that it will magically make it go away. She calls it the brujeria. It's like CBD oil cures, but without all that useless extraction process. Clinically proven to be just as effective as CBD for curing cancer, homosexuality, amputation, and death. Story 10. Dermatologist here. Dude was trying to get rid of his papulopustulosa acne with a homemade mask, which consisted of a mix between betamethasone ointment, honey, cream cheese, yogurt, banana, and makeup in cream for color. So many bad things here, and the dude developed a nodular cystic acne after 3 or so applications, which he did daily because, of course. Who suggested this abomination? Various YouTube videos and his own initiative of mixing everything in a bowl to cure faster. Going by the logic, the more stuff you put in your cure, the higher the chance you will eventually hit one or two things that actually help. Story 11. Nurse here had the fortunate luck to be privy to a patient's super-duper secret way of getting rid of leg cramps at night. Get a cork, not just any cork though, it must be from a bottle of red wine, and tuck it in between your toes at night. He was very sure that was the cure that Big Pharma wasn't telling us. Completely irrelevant that he started taking a magnesium supplement at the same time as his newfound super cure of toe cork fondling. So Big Pharma, if you're reading this, we all know now. Put a cork in it. When I read get a cork, I was really expecting it to take a much worse direction. Well, as we all know, the cure for suds is putting a cork in all of your spongy holes so that when you sneeze, there are no more bubbles. Story 12. Other side of the patient. I was on a business trip when my tooth implant fell out. I still had a full day in a strange city. Next week, I proudly went to my dentist, feeling better than MacGyver, bragging how smart I was. So I needed something pliable, harmless enough, and that would hold the tooth for a couple of hours. You use bubblegum. What? How can you possibly know? You are far, far from being the first who thought about that, and will not be the last either. Clue for my bubble burst: without chewing gum. A colleague of mine had his tooth prosthetic fall out, happened a couple of times already. He was fed up with it, and since he was at sea, there wasn't a dentist anywhere nearby, so he used Loctite, some industrial superglue. It worked. A couple of years later, it's still holding on. His dentist wasn't happy. The stuff is probably toxic. Story 13. Getting drunk to cure a cold. The Irish version is a few hot whiskeys, then go to bed in your clothes and lots of blankets. The alcohol is meant to keep you asleep while you sweat it out. The main ingredient in night nurses is ethanol, primarily to help your sleep from what I can tell. Obviously, none of this is going to cure your cold, but it's amazing what a decent night's sleep can do to let your body deal with it. Sometimes cold cures aren't actually about curing the cold, but just feeling less crappy while you get over it. I personally like to get as hot as humanly possible under sweaters and duvets and wallow in misery. Story 14. I took my daughter to the doctor for a recurring ear infection when she was about 4. The doctor took one look in her ear and asked me if I had seen her putting any foreign objects into her ears, and I said no. He then took some tweezers and pulled out a small piece of what turned out to be garlic. I told him I had no idea how it got there. He said it was definitely making her ear infections worse. Turns out that her dad and stepmom had heard that garlic oil can help cure infections, and they didn't have any, so instead of taking my daughter to the doctor like they should have, they literally just shoved a small clove of garlic in my daughter's ear and left it there. I'm guessing there were some family court ramifications over that? Hoping there were. Story 15. This isn't from something I've seen clinically, but if you look it up, there's news articles about Facebook groups of parents who encourage each other to do horrible bleach enemas, or to make their kids swallow caustic chemicals to cure autism. And then when the kid gets agitated and sheds their intestinal lining, they consider it a sign that it's working. This is literal child abuse. Not only that, but the crazy ones think autism is caused by parasites, usually blamed on GMO experiments by the government or Big Pharma. They call the intestinal lining rope worms. They legitimately think their children's shredded organs are worms. I had no idea my faith in humanity could go into the negatives. Story 16. Worked in pharmacy for a while, heard some wild ones, but the most prolific seemed to be coconut oil for eye infections, lube, ear infections, cystitis, thrush, oral and genital, mouth ulcers, cold sores. All sorts, really. There was a craze a while back for it. Funnily enough, it didn't seem to help, and I'm not happy about it being a lube. Condoms don't like oil-based lubricants, and just the thought of it all up in my clunge brings to mind discomfort for some reason. Coconut oil for use on my man's dong has been very well received. Not with a condom, of course, so he'd give it a thumbs up for use as a lube. And I would imagine doing it in the shower would be more doable. Story 17. My patient came in complaining that her skin turned blue. After ruling out that she was a Smurf, I asked her if she was using any alternative products. Turns out she had been ingesting colloidal silver with the belief that it would prevent infections. I've encountered this exact story too. She wasn't even that concerned about turning blue. Aside from not preventing infections, are there any other downsides? Because I think having blue skin would be pretty cool. Story 18. Work in the medical field, yogurt up their vag for yeast infection. This is something that's often taught to girls as a home remedy. The problem is, most don't realize it's supposed to be plain yogurt, and even then, it's not a substitute for medical care. I think I still have a copy of The Care and Keeping of You, where they recommended plain yogurt and warm water. Yet in the same book, they say you should never douche unless instructed by a doctor. You mean I can't use the Yoplait strawberry mango flavor that I always buy for lunch? Story 19. I'm a urologist. I had a patient come into the ED with wire wrapped around the head of his wiener. He attached this to what I think were popsicle sticks and another band of wire around the base of his wiener. It was like a wiener splint. He said it was to give him erections. The wire had eroded through his skin and his corporeal bodies were exposed, as well as his urethra. This actually appeared to be just ischemic necrosis and wasn't even really infected. It was copper wire. Yes, he was homeless and mentally ill. Story 20. Not a doctor, but my vet friend once had a client rub butter all over her cat in hopes that the cat would lick it off because the cat had stopped eating. There's a level of reasoning in this one that's totally out of whack with how ultimately silly it is. When my previous cat had cancer, I had some success keeping her weight up by putting a little wet food on her paws. She'd lick it off, but that was on top of doing literally everything else I could try and help her. Story 21. Had a patient who couldn't sleep because she had gotten bug bites on her legs, keeping her awake. Her cure? She poured boiling water on them, gave herself third-degree burns to treat her bug bites. Okay, I use a warm spoon remedy to remove itching. Hold the spoon under the hot tap until the spoon is warm, not burning, and press on the bite. It works, but it's not permanent. But this? Christ. Story 22. My mom, a psychiatric nurse practitioner, has a patient who smokes meth because it's the only thing that helps them sleep. Pretty wacky considering Nazis in World War II used it to not sleep. Nah, I sleep like a baby on amphetamines. If your ADHD is bad, stimulants will help you relax, making it easier to sleep. Paradoxically, it's also easier to stay awake. Very high doses will probably make you stay awake, and likely slightly psychotic though. Story 23. Paramedic once had a patient diagnosed with a cancerous growth on his ear. He took care of it himself with fingernail clippers. It got so infected by the time he called 911, he could see his jawbone through his cheek. What inspired him to call 911? I hope it was the jawbone. I'm the type of person who will seek medical attention upon finding out I have cancer. I'm not going to wait until I see bones and stuff. Story 24. A doctor in the family told me an infant was brought into the ER incredibly ill, shaking and vomiting from her daycare. She had a huge oral ulcer in her mouth that her mom tried to cure by killing the bacteria, but they were out of mouthwash, so she diluted vodka and apple juice. She had the "can I see the manager" haircut and threw a huge fit when the CPS was called. Wow, so did she also have the deer in headlights look when the cops arrived? I'll wager that she went full Karen. Story 25. Told the patient to apply cream to their foot. They ignored my advice and just kept rubbing garlic over it. They later came back and I told them their feet are getting worse because they aren't using their cream and they now need to go to a hospital. They ignored me and kept just rubbing garlic. Eventually, they lost their foot. Oh my God, what is it with people and garlic? Garlic scares off disease vampires. Story 26. Not a doctor, but my job is to read medical records all day, and I know it's a bad idea even when I see one. This dude with type 2 diabetes had a gnarly open wound on his leg. He was trying to self-treat with essential oils. They didn't help, and the wound was just getting worse. Finally, after 3 months of the wound getting longer and deeper, the guy showed up to urgent care smelling like a corpse. The doctor looked at his leg and could see bone. He sent the guy to the ER, and his leg was amputated. Story 27. I knew someone who got cancer and decided to starve it instead of taking chemo. First results after the 40-day fast were promising, but not for long. He died in less than a year. The sad part is the survival rate with chemo for this type of cancer is really high, and it was detected quite early. What kind was it? Non-Hodgkin lymphoma. Story 28. Heat lamp therapy on a very young woman who had a very high chance of her breast cancer being cured from chemo. She traveled to Mexico and paid for it. We live in Canada, so it would have been free for her, but she waited too long with alternative therapy and ended up dying. Story 29. Not a doctor. I used to be a medic. During my medic course, one of the other students said that she put coffee on a second-degree burn her friend had. The instructor's mouth just dropped to the floor. Instead of cleaning it to prevent infections, putting coffee has the reverse effect. Do not do that. Story 30. Dentist here. I know a guy who lost a tooth, got the tooth, put some home building cement on the root, put it back in the alveoli, and showed up a week later with a massive infection. He lost the tooth, 2 neighboring teeth, and some part of his jawbone. Story 31. A potato for a prolapsed uterus. It is an old wives' tale, but she followed through with it. It had roots and everything. Whenever I read about this, I keep forgetting there are small potatoes. Story 32. Alcohol for a 3-year-old. Let that sink in. The parents told me that when their child had a cold, they gave the kid vodka mixed with some herbs. To top it all off, they were anti-vaxxers. I haven't had dumber patients since then. Story 33. Rural nurse here. Had a patient soak his finger in kerosene in order to make it grow back. I'm picturing the severed finger in a glass of kerosene on the kitchen windowsill, waiting for it to sprout roots like a plant cutting. Story 34. Essential oil. Even non-doctors know this very well. Oh, you have genetic disease? Did you try this essential oil or yoga? Story 35. I heard this from a PA. Guy couldn't or wouldn't pay for blood thinner, so he took rat poison. Story 36. A lady thought she could cure her cancer with essential oils. It didn't work. She ended up in the ER weeks later. Story 37. Butter on a burn. Please leave your stories in the comments. I'd love to make a video of them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.